Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another gig live Q&A call. It's February 25th. My name is James Cronk. I'm your host. I'm in front of the camera today. Behind the scenes, as always, is Mr. Scott Massey, who is our, technical director extraordinaire, who does everything else and actually does all the work behind the scenes in Golf Industry Guru. But I'm very excited today to talk about everything and anything that relates to food and beverage with our very special guest, and very much looking forward to bringing on Mr. Matthew Gilbert, the executive chef, the director of food and beverage of the Medinah Country Club. And really, Scott, without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. There we go, Matt. Welcome to the live Q&A call on Golf Industry Guru.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you today.
Yeah, it's awesome. Matt, we got connected by a mutual friend in the food and beverage business who I have great respect for, and who sent me a little note saying, you need to talk with this fellow. And that's how we got connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So Diana DeLucia, fantastic person, true industry, veteran and professional. And we've had the good fortune of working with her quite a bit recently on a feature for Golf Kitchen that's going to come out in April. And so getting to know her, she's amazing. Been around the world too, fellow traveler, and just a person who's super passionate about our industry and about specifically on the cook side of things, the chef side of things. Bringing new talent to the club side of things from the industry itself, and then bringing the young generation up. And those are things that really matter a lot to me as well, too. So a great connection for sure. And I'm very thankful to her.
Yeah, Matt, we were just talking off screen for a little bit about Diana. And for those of you, ladies and gentlemen, that are not aware of Golf Kitchen magazine, and the book, really, it's unbelievable what she puts together. And look her up on LinkedIn, check out her materials. But one of the things that I agree with you, Matt, more is that she really has this passion for, I don't know if it's exploring, exposing these young chefs and of any age, but in the club business, and really shining a light on the quality of individuals that work in the club business. And I know, obviously, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, because you've been at Medinah a little over 5 years, Matthew. You've worked in other parts of the world. You've got all kinds of different things in your background. Please take some time and just tell our listeners about your journey that has brought you to one of the great clubs in the world.
Yeah, certainly. So, it's a very improbable story, I think. One of the things that's the most interesting to me looking back is that I did not grow up in a foodie family, really at all. I was lucky to grow up in a musical family, and so music was really like my passion. As I started finding, myself in my early teenage years, and got into playing in rock bands and stuff like that. But a lot of the people you talk to, especially young people now, when I'm interviewing, it's like, what was your inspiration to get into this business that is so unforgiving? And a lot of times the answer is my grandma or my mom or my dad or my uncle, cooked. And so I did not have that growing up. It was very interesting, but I was trying to earn a lot of money, or any money really, for guitars and amps in my early teenage years, and had a paper route. I was a lawnmower kid, in rural Montana, so kind of the middle of nowhere, and got into the one fine dining restaurant there as a dishwasher. The bass player of the band was a dishwasher and hooked me up. It's making like $5 an hour, which seemed like a lot. But getting in that environment, two things struck me right away. Number one, just how nuts everybody was. And the energy of that was right up my alley. So as a 15-year-old kid, and I'm 47 years old now, I still feel the same way about that environment. Number two was, as soon as I started to get exposed to interesting flavors, like, because I didn't have much background, everything was new and everything was amazing, and I had some great mentors. I think a lot of us do, throughout the years. And it's important, I think, looking back, to kind of identify certain parts of your life that connect to mentorship. And so I had a great mentor, Scotty Burton, early on in that period of time when I was 16, 17 years old, who came from Boston. He had graduated from New England Culinary Institute in Vermont. And so because of the relationship that I had with him for the next few years, I learned really a lot. I worked all the stations in that place, learned a lot about putting together flavors, and ended up going to that culinary school too. Ended up going to Boston in my first year internship with Gordon Hammersley. And in every step of the way, just getting my butt kicked for sure. But I really was just super diehard about it as a young guy. So after the first year of internship, I had there were a number of French chefs at New England Culinary Institute, which is called NECI. Unfortunately, that's no longer in existence, but it was a great school. And I think I was there kind of the height of that period of time. I had a great French mentor my second year, Robert Barral, who had connections in the Montpellier area of France. And he was, liking my attitude and my skill set that was developing at that point. And he said, it's too bad that you don't speak some French. I'd send you to France, to my country. And I had actually taken 4 years just randomly in high school of French, again, in Montana. It's like a place you're never going to use French again. But I'm really glad in hindsight, like all these things, like, when you look back on your life, it's sort of their doorways, right? So one of the doorways there was, because I had enough French to get by, he gave me a test at a 1-star Michelin restaurant in Chambéry. And if I didn't basically make him look bad in the 6 months I was there, then he would set me up in a 3-star Michelin. And so I worked, you just work all the time and put everything you got in it. But at the end of the time, he talked to my chef, and he says, "Oh, Mathieu," he says, you're not too bad, huh? You're not too bad. Never going to give you the thumbs up really, but not too bad as a win for an American in France. And so I ended up getting that opportunity, and that was amazing. It's called Jardin des Sens, the Garden of the Senses. 40 cooks for 90 customers, lunch and dinner, and just incredible. The 3-star Michelin level, food was really incredible to witness as a young person. Of course, the abuse that you take, I wouldn't deal with that now as an old guy, but when you're young, you're just so gung ho. So was able to work with them again in Paris. They took over La Maison Blanche, which was right across the river from the Eiffel Tower. And again, just as a young 21-year-old guy, like that was an incredible experience. And it also coming from Montana, just opened my mind to the world, all of what's going on out there. It's so much more than I ever, thought, just coming from a small town. And so I decided kind of in that, coming back from that, and a lot of travelers have this experience on their first time overseas, I got to do this more. But I did. I made everything in my life kind of about moving around, working for different chefs in the States, but also external to the States. So I got to work with Susan Spicer in New Orleans, which was an amazing experience. She was a great mentor early on, just whooped my ass. Good. I learned a lot, very inspired by her style of food, which is very global, eclectic. And that's kind of what I refer to my style as these days. Worked in a few different cities in the United States, but then spent really the most of the remainder of the time outside of the States. And the notable places there, I was in South America for a good while. And I ended up marrying a woman that I met in Peru. We got married in Cairo. And so basically I'd worked for the Mandarin Oriental in San Francisco. And one of the chefs there took a job as an executive sous chef at an opening property for Fairmont in Cairo. It was called Fairmont Nile City. And he offered the position of chef de cuisine to me for that opening. And I ended up going and doing it and invited my girlfriend, like any chivalrous young man would do, to move to Egypt with him. And he said yes to that. And we ended up getting married there. We were married just before the Arab Spring started in 2011. And our daughter came along just after that. It was time at that point to certainly move. Cars were on fire and whatnot in the streets. And so that's when I hooked back up with a guy that I had gone to culinary school with. His name is Chef Josh Getz, and he's fantastic too. He's the chef of the Charleston Yacht Club now, but has been all over the world. And he was the other guy in my school who was kind of internationally, headed out into the world. I did France. He was in Italy. He ended up in Beijing for quite a while, and then ended up in Hong Kong, and they were looking for another chef. So I went from Cairo, actually Peru at the time. I was with my family when my daughter was born down there. We didn't go back to Egypt. We moved instead to Hong Kong, where we spent the better part of the next 6 years living in, something about the size of your closet. Our son was born there, and I worked for the American Club of Hong Kong, which was another just incredibly transformative experience. I'll talk at some point today about the shift that you go through as a chef from a la carte restaurants to hotels. And then hotels and clubs are more similar than probably an a la carte restaurant and a club is, but still there's a pretty big, mental shift that has to go into changing yourself and go into club mode. And I thought, oh, how hard can a club, chef job be? And moving to Hong Kong, it was hard. It was very hard. It took me probably 3 years, if I'm being honest, really to get my feet under me there, because of, language and culture and stuff like that too. But just the skill set that you have to have at a club of that size. That was an enormous club. And it was pretty much a food and beverage club too. Like there's no golf in downtown Hong Kong for pretty obvious reasons. And so it's food and beverage heavy. And that's what everybody was there for. And so we were constantly just doing a million things. Chef Josh was the town club chef, and then I was the country club or Thai Tam location on the South China Sea, the chef of that property, and met a couple important people that I'll mention right now, just because why I'm here came from that. And that's Robert Sorecki, who I know has been on this program before, a good friend and a person that I've worked for in a couple different places. He was the GM there early in my time. And then he brought another gentleman over, Mark Gallaudet, who most recently was the GM of the CC at the DC Ranch in Arizona. Mark was a lifelong chef who was kind of getting into director of operations role. He did that there, and I worked with the two of them and my friend Josh, again, for many years in Hong Kong. Robert ended up returning to the States and ended up here at Medinah. And Mark, in the end, he moved to Idaho, and they were looking for a chef. We were ready to get back stateside because we had 2 kids at that point. My son was born in Hong Kong, and we wanted to just be closer to family. So we took a job in moving from the metropolis of Hong Kong to rural Idaho, to work with Mark, but also to be closer to my parents, who were in Montana at the time. And my mom and her husband moved to Idaho while we were there, as my dad did too, actually, for a little while. So we were very close to the family, which was great. But it was a culture shock for sure. And it was the kind of thing that was cool experience, a bit of a fixer-upper situation on the kitchen side on that property, and spent a few years doing that. But after a little while, it was clear that we wanted to be back from a family standpoint and also in a work standpoint, to be back in a more urban environment. And so the move here happened when my predecessor, who's a great guy, you probably know him too, Chef Michael Ponzio, he took a role at the Union League Club in downtown Chicago in 2019. And I accepted the job to replace him here, with Mark as the AGM, and then Robert as the GM. And so again, it was one of those situations where, when you are vertically sort of aligned philosophically, it's like really rewarding. And both of those gentlemen, obviously, they went on to do great things in different places at this point. And I'm still here, but man, am I happy to be where I'm at. I really enjoyed working with them in all those different places, but especially here. And then we have a wonderful new GM now, who I just love working with, Dave Schneider. That's a name that a lot of people will know out there. He's very tenured, but from an energy alignment standpoint, like this guy, I just love working with him because he's super positive. He's super, energetic, doesn't sleep a whole lot, but apparently genetically doesn't need to, and is just rock and roll all the time in a very positive direction, which has been amazing for me personally, and also for our team. I think growth and development wise, a lot has come out of that. So that's the abbreviated version of the story.
I love it. That's great. That's great. Matt, so many things there about your journey, about your experience, about, working at clubs of different sizes, of different shapes. But what I'd like to ask you now about, getting into kind of, we're going to hear about Medinah a little bit, and not everyone is going to be the American Club in Hong Kong, or everyone's going to be the Medinah to that stature. But right. What I know that you've got different experiences and things you've done. What are some of the kind of simple, high impact things that a manager can do, or that a club can do, that can kind of elevate that dining experience? And I want to talk for a second a little bit about what is the elevated dining experience in your world. Let's first talk about. Let me ask you about, what are some of the things that you would say are your values, your principles, about no matter where you go, no matter where you work, when you're creating a dining experience, whether it's paper plates or whether it's T-bone china. What are some of your values when it comes to what is an elevated dining experience?
Awesome. Yeah. The most important thing from my point of view, and it was one as a chef from the freestanding world, where in this world, our ego is allowed to sort of dominate. And I think that probably most GMs, who are listening today, or, owners or people who are always like working to find a good chef fit for their club, know how very difficult that is. And I think the biggest obstacle, and probably a lot of chefs that hear this will hate me for saying it, but in a lot of cases, it is our ego. It's that we are used to being right, and we're kind of the king of the castle in the kitchen. And so we also are a specialist in things that, members or diners may know less about than we do. And so we sometimes just, we aren't able to get past that. And I think for me, I was burned enough by my own ego in my early years. I began to start learning, kind of how to overcome that. And as like a Scorpio type dude, everything was really intense, and that was good for certain purposes, but really bad for a lot of like relationship side things. And so coming into the club environment, what I've learned for myself and what I absolutely do, but I also suggest really to everybody to do this, is really get to know your membership. And that sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but a lot of chefs, there are different types of chefs out there. Some are very social, and some enjoy the interaction, going to tables or being out amongst the membership, but a lot of chefs don't. And so this environment is very hard. If you're stuck on your ego and you being right about what they should eat, like the membership should eat, or you are not interested in being out there and hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly of what people want. So I think that from an experience standpoint, the most important thing in any club is to figure out what does that membership group value. And the only way to do that is to talk to them and listen to them. And so really for me, I sort of calibrate my mind to the first year is about getting to know people, but mostly just engaging them in conversation to extrapolate. Like, we're having a great conversation, but what my brain is doing is trying to pull things that they like, things that they don't like, and find commonality. And in clubs of this size, what's nice is there are multiple different like demographic groups. And so you can find sort of patterns throughout, and that may have to do with age, generation, or just interest, people who are interested in food versus those that need to eat something and want something good, but they're not thinking about it all day. And so my suggestion really is just, you have to have a rapport with those guys. And then once you do that, build your program around those things. And so we incorporated, I think, a lot of menu changes happen at Medinah because of how frequently people dine there. And that gives us, like, the velocity gives us the ability to try different things too. And so as a chef, you're like, they should like this. And later when we talk about signature dishes, it's so funny for like a chef ego in the clubs. You're like, here's my signature dish. And it could very well be absolutely rejected by that membership if it doesn't align with what they're interested in. And so my chef team here and I kind of agree that the signature dishes that we do at this club are essentially chosen by the membership. So we'll put out all these different dishes that we love and we think that they're going to like, and some of them do better than others, and others like now can never leave the menu because they've voted with their dollar, so to speak. So, building programs around their values is awesome. I think doing programming in your a la carte restaurant. So a lot of times we think about like, the banquet side of things is where we do live cooking or, themed stuff. What we did that worked really well, and I know other clubs do this, is incorporate themed, dining into what we're doing in the restaurants. And so, for example, origin dinners, we run in our fine dining restaurant 3 in the summer and then 2 over the winter. And those themes will change. So we did Morocco, Tuscany, Argentina, Spain. We're going to do Paris Bistro actually in a couple weeks for one of the winter ones. And those are essentially, we take the kitchen of the fine dining restaurant and we put it outside on the veranda. And it's, pretty fairly priced. It seems expensive compared to some of the other things we offer, but it's literally a live cooked experience where as members, you're sitting there. We can only do 80 covers on that night. You get your table for the night, but you buy into a whole experience. And so there'll be music on that theme, so we're doing stuff from Argentina or flamenco from Spain. And then the cooks are out there cooking on grills. We have all kinds of live equipment to use, plating all the salads, and any small plate items. We're plating them right in front of the people. And so everyone will come over there and, take pictures or take videos. And we're literally serving them just straight off the line, so to speak. Those have been huge and really like embraced by the membership to the point where we now do a couple in the winter. different formats. We did a family style one for our last Italian one, which was just under a month ago, and that was completely packed in the middle of the winter. So these kind of things I think are driving interest. Thursday night theme nights we do in our all day dining restaurant, and those are themes. Usually we run 18 weeks of those, so there's 6 different themes, and the theme repeats 3 times over the course of those 18 weeks of summer, but the dishes never are the same. So every time we come through the theme again, we do different dishes, and that draws an amazing crowd. I'm like really kind of impressed each time at how many people come and do that. Even if they weren't golfing that day or they weren't at the club, they'll come in for those things. And I think what you're doing there from an experience standpoint is you're showing the members that you're there for them, So ultimately that's the ego problem, is like, they're not there for me. Like I'm here for them, as is my enormous team. We're all here for you guys. And so I think it's important to show membership that you're, like maybe you do an event and it only 20 people come. And in your mind, you're like, that wasn't worth doing. It still was worth doing, because you really want to just show that you're putting effort into what they like. You're doing stuff. It's important as a club chef to be doing things. If you just have one menu and that's all you ever do, you're probably going to get booted, So we're there to do cool stuff for them. And so one of my values is creating a feeling for the membership, a feeling of being taken care of, heard, cared for, on the soft side of things. It's a big one for me. But I think if we're talking about elevating the dining experience, a lot of it has to do with that too. And so later we'll talk about hiring, skill sets versus like values or traits. And I think that value can add non-monetarily, like it doesn't cost you anything, to make sure that you're putting love into, the preparation of the food, and also the service team. You got to invest a lot in getting them to understand that they're not just there to make a tip. They're there to deliver a feeling for the membership. And so, as we know from tons of, surveys of our industry, if the food is bad, but the service is good, people come back. If the food is great and the service is bad, they may not, they likely won't. And so a lot of how you feel about the value of your dining experience has to deal with like literally just your interpersonal interactions with people throughout the meal. So that's kind of my answer. I think there's a lot of things, but it comes down to figuring out what, as the chef or the food and beverage director, what do they want, and then build your program around those things.
Thank you. Love that. So many good nuggets there. I want to focus on one thing that you talked about. I don't know if this is a future question in my list here, but it doesn't matter. I want to go to it now because, that's what we try to aspire to do. We know that, that the challenge, that the benefit of working in a restaurant is that, if a customer's not happy, they don't come back. It's the bad thing, but it's also a good thing because you don't have to, you never know, right? You just hope you replace them with someone else. Obviously, in our club business, where we have golfers, where we have regulars, where we have annual pass holders, where we have members, they're coming back tomorrow. And so if they don't like something, if they don't like what you're doing, if they don't like a product, if they think they can make the French fries better, if they think that they could do something different or better, you're going to hear about it. And so, I love what you talk about when you talk about your value and about you're there for them. Yeah. But Matthew, how do you take a young chef that has an ego? We're just generalizing here, right? Mm-hmm. That is going to get offended when Mr. Smith complains that the soup is, too warm or that something else is not happening, right? How do you handle that? How do you create that environment where you're able to deal with the 10% and it doesn't kind of diminish the enjoyment of the 90% or the 80%, right? Because when you say a minute ago about you're there for them and you put your ego aside and you're going to try different things. And we all know in that experience, you're not always going to hit home runs, and you're going to come across people that have sometimes just the wrong opinion about what they like or what they should like. So how do you instill that in your environment? And I'm awesome. One more thing. I mentioned one more thing because, we talk about Michelin-starred restaurant. We talk about kind of your experiences, and we were just talking offline about the bear and all that stuff, right? And about the intensity of the kitchen, the passion that you put on a plate when
Yeah.
you were at that level of making food, you're exposing your own soul to people
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
making food. And when someone doesn't like it,
Mhm.
it's a whole other different ball game than, I didn't like the frozen lasagna that I bought at Costco. So
Right.
share with me your thoughts about all that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So that takes a lot of practice. And the term you wear it on your sleeve, like we do, absolutely. And even a lot of chefs, and it happens in me now, but I don't allow anyone to see it. It still happens though. Like when you make something beautiful, maybe it took a few days to prepare, and they're like, that wasn't good at all. You're like, oh, it just feels like a dagger to the heart. And so I try to be just super like, stoic in those moments. But that's after a lot of years of practicing. And so I think that's a practice thing, really. And it happened it happened in Hong Kong because, again, I was learning for the first time what it meant to be a club chef. And, Will Guidara, Unreasonable Hospitality, talks about how hard those guys tried at 11 Madison Park to gather information about diners before they arrived, so that when they got there, they could create these, what we call at the club, bespoke experiences that would just blow people's minds, like his Instagram, I think he said something about like origami, and so then when the person sat down, their table was covered with origami swans or whatever it was. And so this blows people's minds. One of the beautiful things about clubs, if you think about it this way, so your point is right. And at Medinah, we're very lucky. Like really the vast majority of our membership are so kind and nice and thankful. It makes it easy to see them every day, right? But the downside of this relationship is like when a bad customer, leaves your restaurant, like you said, or even checks out of your hotel, like you're never going to see that person again. And so you're kind of like, good riddance. At the club, you're seeing that person for breakfast the next day, lunch, and probably dinner, and everything that you did wrong that day is still present there. So with those guys, you got to work really hard. And my personal intent, or what I try to do, is just really don't give up on that. Like form a relationship where you're definitely taking a bit of a beating early on, but with time they see that you're invested, in fixing that. So with regard to feedback, I suggest for anyone who's getting used to that to put yourself in the role of being like their agent. So if there's a problem, you're not taking that personal, even though they're directing it at you. What I am right now is a person who's here to help figure out what went wrong and what we can do to help you have a better time next time, either with the same dish, or we learned that that's just not a good fit. Like, what would you like? Right. And so I found in Hong Kong, because I did a lot of phone calls over there, and that was a different club, it was a debenture membership. So everybody was there for a short period of time, and they wanted what they wanted now for themselves, right? Because they're there only for a few years in Hong Kong. And our club is a generational club. We have grandchildren who will grow up, and their children will be there. And so they're investing in a much more like long-term way, which results in a different sort of vibe. But in Hong Kong, I got used to a lot of squeaky, wheels getting the grease. And those phone calls, it was very humbling. And over time, I just came to understand this is a part of the role. It's a part of the job. And so I was thinking about this last night. There's a term that I've been using with our team right now that comes from the Marines during the Iraq War. It's embrace the suck. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on TV, but it's a freaking awesome line, because, obviously with those guys, it's life or death. And for us, it's not. But the principle is the same. And so what I love to do now, and what I steer our team towards, our leadership team, there's a lot of leaders on the team at different phases of growth. When there's a challenge or a problem or negative feedback, like you say, or constructive, critical feedback, instead of being like off put by that and trying to resolve it as quickly as possible because it feels uncomfortable, I actually like just try to find out more from the member.
Love it. I love it.
And
Yeah.
those things they feed so well into your training program, because in theory, you're training on all the things, or most of the things, that they're going to find challenges with anyway. But what they're sort of urging you to do when there's a challenge like that is just elevate that item on the list of what needs to be trained on. And so we incorporate much of what we receive critical feedback wise into like the next day's briefing, or all week we're talking about that. And so maybe that's recently one of our awesomest guys member, just I love this guy, and he feeds back a lot. He was like, it seems like it takes a long time after I get sat in the fine dining restaurant to get my first greeting. So awesome first experience with the hostess. We get sat, it's beautiful, we're doing good, but there's this gap, right? And so when we heard that, and he's like, I love you. A lot of members are like, I love you so much, and they're like afraid to tell you bad news.
Right.
And my message is always, no, lay it on me, right? And so we were able to tackle that. And every time he's been back since, and probably everybody else benefits from that too. It's like, we're right on it, right? We're right on it. So the team is at a point where they can respond pretty quickly from feedback like that. But in cases like this, sometimes they're pointing out a blind spot for you or something that you trained on a while ago, but it's become lax. So this gentleman, I won't name names, but I just love this guy. He writes these long reviews on everything we do. He comes to everything with his wife, sits there and takes notes while they eat, right? So Valentine's Day, the Italian thing we did, every holiday function, all the stuff. And so with him, I said, I would actually like it if you were a little more critical. We have a group of members that are like him, that they're our biggest fans, And so I know that they are on our side. They want us to just go up. But because they're members, they're having the member experience every time they're there. And so that feedback that I've gotten from that group of people over the past couple of years has been really, really good. And so again, that's just getting over your own feeling of discomfort when you are confronting a person who obviously, usually the person who's complaining is also somewhat altered, like they're upset. And so you have that, your heart starts beating and you're like, here's going to be a rough interaction. For chefs, that's one of the worst moments, but it's a practice thing. And so at my age now, I would take that phone call like every day, because we end up walking away with so much good info that we can work with.
I love the term embrace the suck, because it's a philosophy, it's a leadership philosophy of not running away from criticism. And the reality is that we're always going to get some criticism that in the moment seems to us like, incorrect. Yeah. But there's always some nugget of truth, right, in everything, right? And and I think the challenge sometimes, and I say this sometimes when I'm talking to people, like you're talking to managers, if you're constantly getting criticism, well, guess what? Chances are you're not delivering on all of the rides. Like if your life is filled with people that are unhappy, or staff that are unhappy, or staff that don't show up to work, or customers that are late, whatever it might be, well, guess what? That's normally, there's some truth in that reflection to what's going on in your leadership and in your business. So before you discount it all, like all members complain, well, guess what? They don't all complain, but certainly if you've got more than a few, there's a reason to reflect on that. I want to ask you about switching up a little bit.
Yeah.
About creativity. You're talking about at Medinah. How many staff you lead in the food and beverage team? You said 200 and
in season 230, and that's event sales, setups, banquet staff, front and back of house, a la carte staff, front and back of house, and stewarding.
Right. So from a food and beverage standpoint, you got lots of rides that are going on and all kinds of opportunities, right? And so sometimes what we talk about creativity and about raising the level. So you talked about trying new things and different dishes and different themes, and also you're talking about you coming from an experience at a high level of culinary creativity. Mm-hmm. So if you're a club operator, or you're a club GM, or you're a club chef that right now has hamburgers and French fries and meatloaf, and how do you deal with, or how should someone embrace creativity, adding new dishes, adding more sophisticated dishes, keeping, once again, you talked about the special dishes that our longtime members love, but also attracting a new generation of diners. And, I'll go off on a tangent about gluten-free in a heartbeat, because, the reality is that people's expectations about what they get from their dining experience is drastically changing on a regular basis. And we have to keep up. If we want to have people spend their hard-earned money in our clubs and in our restaurants, we have to elevate the experience because it's becoming so expensive. So how do you balance that, Matthew? How do you balance the Mrs. Smith, who's 80, wants the shrimp salad sandwich from 1965, and the young family that just paid 10 times more money to join the club expects to have a Chicago style downtown experience?
Yes. No, it's a fantastic question. And every club is going to have that as a challenge or an issue. So it's important as a chef to have a philosophy and then a plan for that. I think the way I think about it is, again, most important thing is to know your membership, right? So if you're talking to the people that are 78 and 68 and 58, on down, then you kind of know what's resonating with them. For sure, like with the bear, like we were talking about, when that came out. Also, Chef's Table. I talk a lot about the Netflix series in just episodes that members have seen. Like, there's so many ways in just conversations, because everyone likes talking about food, right? As you're talking, you start to glean kind of like what do they like? What are they into? And so then you're using your menu. So the way that I look at our menu, and I use a weird word for it. Sounds kind of like a casino term, but in this case, it's not. It's just the term slots, right? Slots. So every menu item is a slot. And what that means is certain menu items will never change. So like we're always going to have here, we'll always have cheese curds, chicken wings. We have a delicious burger. We have it's called the Almost OG Philly cheesesteak, which we made with one of our members from Philadelphia. So those are things that are like a whitefish sandwich, which we'll make a joke about later. Like these dishes are never going to change. So those slots are fixed. Other slots, and it kind of has to do also with like genre. So there are salad slots. So the Caesar salad is never going to change. The chop salad is never going to change. But the, halloumi salad is, or whatever. So there are certain slots that you can change, and that that's a certain genre of food that we're doing, or a certain part of the world or style, or, some kind of category that you can operate within just on that line. And as you go through your menu, you have to use the whole breadth of your menu to represent what all those different groups wants. And so in a place like Hong Kong, where we had 3,000 plus members and reciprocity with 5 different American clubs, that was a lot easier because we had so many menus. We just had a ton of menus. We had a ton of restaurants. And so somewhere in that mix, you were going to get a pretty solid chunk of what you wanted as a member. In a club like Medinah, it's smaller, but still pretty good size. So this would be harder in a small club, like a 300 person, club in I don't know, Montana. I won't make fun of any other state aside from the one I've been at, grew up in. But the point is, even in that environment, you can represent those different wants across the breadth of the menu. And the best problem to have, which we arrived at here probably 2.5 years ago, is when all of those slots result, when you change something, you're taking away someone's favorite dish every time. And so like, that seems bad, right? Everyone's like, how could you take off the New Orleans crawfish, And you're like, the line I always give is, nothing is gone forever at Medinah. Like, if there's something that people really like, we'll bring it back, no problem. But we also, what I would say to the members is, okay, you don't want me to take that away, but you do want velocity of the menu. You eat here in the summertime, members eat there 9, 12, 15 meals a week sometimes. And so we have to be changing. But the beautiful part about that, aside from the engagement that it gives the cooks, because chefs want to always, do new stuff, right? It's good for the members, it's good for the cooks, but it also allows us to flex those different slots in ways where we're always delivering to the different groups. So to your point, demographically, 35 to 55, I think our survey information from last year said that 55.5 was the average age of the Medinah member. And within the last 10 years, certainly the fastest growing demographic is 35 to 55, which is awesome because that's my demographic, right? And so it's very easy for me to relate to couples with kids. That's the situation that I have. And food trend wise, they all want to eat what I want to eat, right? So that's an easy one for me to extrapolate onto the menu in different forms. But like you said, it's also really important. We have some card players. They come in and play different card games. And they really, what they want is what we call the sandwich board. And that's a little mini menu where they can have, 5 or 6 different kinds of bread. They can have us assemble for them basically like a ham and cheese sandwich with like some sprouts or something like that, right? And that's what they've been having since long before I was born. And that's all that they want. So the Michelin question, we can talk more about that. But also the club question is, do your members actually want super fine dining food? And as a chef, you have to be prepared for that answer to potentially, in a small place, be no. Like, really, we don't want that at all. Like, if you try to do El Bulli spherification and stuff, in most clubs, you're going to lose most members. The answer probably most often is yes, some of the time we want that. But because we're here so much, we want to just have reliable everyday food that is valuable to us, So across the different outlets, across the different menus, you have all these opportunities to use those, again, slots. All my chefs know, they're like, the slot thing. But that philosophy has won everywhere I've been after discovering that as an MO. So that's my answer. Like, I think you absolutely can increase the quality of what you're doing. You can do all these things as a chef that you should do, but if they don't resonate to that membership, it could potentially be a miss while you think it should be a win. And then you're just frustrated and these guys suck and you're probably going to leave or whatever.
Okay. New topic. I'm going to say that the line that I always use when I always have this thing that says, if I'm talking to a chef and he's worried about his food costs being, 32% instead of 1%, I always say that in the club business, you're never going to be in trouble because your food cost is 1 or 2 points over your budget. You're going to be in trouble when 8 minutes goes by and 4 people don't go off the first tee.
Yeah.
Because food and beverage drives green fee revenue or housing sales or hotel room nights or a whole bunch of other things that we're going to make a lot more money on than whether or not, you've narrowed down the cost of the chicken, to be 31%. Now, that being said, we all have people we have to report to, and we all have KPIs, fiscal KPIs. And what you and I were just chatting about with regards to creativity, menu change, there's training involved with that. There's product involved with that. There's more SKUs involved with that. There's a whole bunch of other things involved with that. And a lot of those things don't help us maintain costs. Yeah. So what are some of the KPIs? If you were taking over a club, Matthew, ABC Golf Club, with 3 different dining outlets and a bunch of other things, and you had the food and beverage director in your office, what are the KPIs that you would be talking to them about that are most important in your mind for our business?
Sure. So yeah, I think again, you're wanting to get to know your audience there. The first thing you do as a chef is assess how the kitchen is being run. Medinah, we're pretty lucky, and I think some clubs are this way, where the most important thing, like you said, the difference between 32 and 31%, the most important thing is member experience. And so if the member experience is amazing, I think in most clubs as a chef, you get a little bit of a pass if your costs are a little bit high. And please understand, I'm not taking away from the importance of fiscal responsibility. Our role is that, and we're responsible for that, so my head is on the block if it doesn't go right, and I accept that fully. But the first thing you want to do when you're coming in the door, are the members happy? In this scenario, presumably they're not probably too happy. And then also, how is your kitchen being run? So for me early on, it's all about vendor audits. You're figuring out who are we buying things from currently. We're going to see where, their warehouses and if they're meat fabrication. For me, I'm always going to wherever the beef comes from and looking at that with my own eyes. You're probably putting together, with your team. I like to do it. A chef can do it by himself, but it's good to do that for the buy-in factor, to do that with your chef group of choosing, like we chose the sausage together, the hot dog, the bacon, the hamburgers that we're going to serve in different places. And we tasted everything the market has. In Chicago, trust me, when it comes to meat, everything's here. So you're evaluating everything. How are we doing with waste? I think that's a massive club problem. If you're not aware, you're going to have some waste. That's in more than probably other sectors of the industry. And to a certain degree, that's okay. But you need to be able to account for that waste as here's where that money, this percentage of my food cost was waste. And here's why, right? Finance directors are generally pretty cool to work with you if you are able to explain those kind of things. So you need to evaluate that aspect of the kitchen. Is the morale of the kitchen team good, right? There are so many factors, because if they don't care, then for sure waste is going up, right? And the experience, I hate to sound soft on this one, but like when cooks care about food, people feel that when they eat it, right? When chefs are cooking from their heart, as cheesy as that sounds, it's like water for chocolate, right? The tear falls into the cake and everybody cries later because they feel her emotion. So we're evaluating our team for that, and we want to invest them. The feeling for the members that we're trying to create, well, the feeling for the staff is just as important, because happy staff who feel protected, cared for, they're in an environment where everything works. They don't have to jam a bamboo skewer into the Roboku to make it work or whatever. All those things translate into a much better product. And then in the meantime, we're working on getting to know our membership. So I streamline down. A lot of times you'll end up with like way too many vendors. So I'll pick the best ones, right? The ones that I personally believe in, and that's product and also service. Like they're going to be there for me when I need them. And then we're really focusing on sharing that with our membership in the form of the menu, like highlighting where ingredients are coming from. Another one of the questions that we talked about is like regionality, so is it from here or not? If it is, tell people that, and then I think as a chef, like represent it with the passion that you have. When that starts to translate to your staff and also to your membership, I think the front of the house part of this is super important too. As passionate as a whole group of chefs can be, if you got a dud out there serving, then that's basically just a wall between all the amazing energy that went to creating things, and then it just gets slammed down in front of a member. They're going to pick up on some of the beauty of what you did by tasting it. But I think of the front of the house as an extension of the energy of the back of the house when it comes to serving members. So, are those KPIs? I'm not sure. That my approach is I find that the finances follow on all of those things. An important one for a chef is, are you financially literate? A lot of chefs, maybe they're amazing chefs, right? It's like the reason that so many restaurants go out of business. You could be the best chef in the world, but if you don't know how to run your books, like you're not going to last. And if you're not, that's okay. Like it's nothing to be ashamed of. There's all kinds of ways to educate either yourself, or if you have a decent relationship with your GM or your finance director, like ask them. And this is an ego thing. Hey, I would like to do continuing education on my financial knowledge of how this operation runs and works. They're going to, almost all the time, they're going to help you to have that happen, because it's in their interest too. So 100%. To be able to explain everything, you need to be able to explain everything, right? So where did this money go? Why is this high? A lot of times when you can just very competently explain how everything's working and you're trending in a good direction in terms of fixing a lot of these things, as long as the members are happy and enjoying, then that's something that over time, works itself into a wonderful position. And I know that's achievable just about anywhere.
Right. Well, and it's achievable when you have the right people. And so let's talk about, what you look for in hiring people, there's no shortage of conversation that's going on right now about the challenges of finding staff, the challenges of finding staff in food and beverage, the challenges of finding staff to work in the kitchen, right? And in particular, now maybe not in for the listener out there that in their specific scenario or club or place, but in general, it's certainly being discussed as an industry wide. So what do you look for, Matt? What do you try to provide from a work environment standpoint? If I said what makes it special to work for you versus opposed to someone else to create a high performing team,
Yeah.
What are some of the advice? What advice would you give other chefs and managers in F&B to achieve tackle this task?
Yeah, that's the most important question, I think, and the one that I'm the most passionately interested in developing myself on, and also the team that I work with to lead this. I think that really the term out there is like employer of choice, and that's kind of bumper sticker sounding. It's just, what does that mean? But I think you have to define yourself in the industry, and that mostly has to do with the experiences that people working for you already are having in broadcasting, right, in different ways. But you have to become really a place that people want to be. And that has to do with what I just was saying a minute ago, the feeling that they have working there. So if you go to work and you get disrespected, or people are messing with you, there's no accountability on the leadership side or the staff side. We all could come up with a lot of traits of a negative or toxic work environment. And so it's a no-brainer to not want to be that, but actually constructing that culture takes a lot of work and a lot of time. One of the lines that I can't remember where I heard it, or I put it together from a few different things, but it was something to the effect of, if you are not actively working to create a culture, an intentional culture, it doesn't mean that a culture will not form. It's just that culture will not be the culture that you want. And so if there's not intentionality behind what you're doing, you'll end up with a culture like that's good. It's just going to happen, but probably you're going to be in a constant state of dealing with problems and unhappiness, low morale, high turnover, all those things. So my philosophy, our philosophy at Medinah, has to do with a term. Again, this is a little cringe for those like old schoolers. It's kind of the inverse of the old school way of thinking, but we call it servant leader. And so a servant leader is a person who essentially works for their staff. So the old model is the staff works for me. I'm the king. You do what I say, or you can get the F out of here. This is the opposite. What am I able to do for you today that makes your time here feel better? The accountability part is still there, right? So sometimes that can translate into, oh, it's that Mr. Nice guy, like the way too nice and just permissive of everything. That's not the case either. So a servant leader, you're doing your best for everybody, but you got to hold them accountable. And if they can't do it, they can't be on the team, right? So you got a spine in there, but you're also handling things from an empathy standpoint that I think works out really well for everybody. So as you work through problems with employees, you grow to understand them. They begin to trust you more. They let you in on things that are troubling them outside of work. Maybe you can even help with some of those things. And guess what that turns into? Die-hard loyalty and buy-in, right? And so if a person knows that you're their fan, or that you are pouring, your time and love into their experience while being there, of course they're going to do better work, right? They're motivated on a level that a lot of workplaces don't end up having. So that's kind of the philosophy from a like how we're trying to create that environment. It all has to do with alignment of words and actions. So you can talk all day. Obviously, right now we're talking a lot, and I talk all the bloody time. I'm so tired of my own voice a lot of days. But there has to be an alignment between the words and then our actions. And we as leaders, we model that all the time. Like the higher you go up in any organization, our GM is under a microscope constantly from all angles. Everybody's watching him. And if he does things that aren't appropriate or that aren't okay, which he would not, by the way, but if he did, that would reflect very poorly on the effort that we have going on here. Same with me, same with the sous chefs. It's all of us, right? And so the alignment there is very important. And that's something that I'm constantly working on with the group, is just to make sure, we're always on stage in the eyes of our staff. So when hiring people, which was your original question, that has to do to me with skill. And the question is skills and traits, right? Or skills or traits. And we can look at it along those two lines. So skills are important. In my opinion, traits are a lot more important. And so you're hiring the person, I think is the term I like to use. We're hiring a person to do some stuff. And the more that person has done that before experientially, like that's going to be a benefit. But there are times, and I call it the chef a-hole rule. I think my HR director didn't want me to use that on air, so I use the a-hole word instead of the real one. But a lot of times in the industry, have a 10 on the skill scale, right? Like somebody is so good, but they're an a-hole, right? They're just absolute toxic to your culture. But because you are somewhat hiring out of desperation, or you're hiring out of need, or you're panicking, you see a person who has skills and you're like, we'll work the rest of it out. Let's just get that person in here. Well, if you get 3 of those guys on one line, you've got, World War III happening, which is horrible for everybody. Like, everyone sees that. So it's a small, area centric disruption, but it affects everything. So really, I think it's focusing on getting skills, and I'll talk about the way that we break down our hierarchy of staff. It's important to have some skills, or at least understanding of how the kitchen works. But more importantly, I spend so much time talking about values, behaviors, and characteristics. And right now with the leadership team, we're working to create a talent selection guide for this coming year, because we hire so many people, that all levels of people that would be doing interviews are operating based on selecting people for our values, right? And so if you're not a person with the servant's heart in the service side of the team, I'm not sure that this is a place for you. You know what I mean? Like, you need to take joy out of helping somebody else. And if you're like, no, I'm here to just make money, man. Like, I know these members are rich, and so if I come here, I'll make it has to be about more than you. In the kitchen, what is your motivation for being there? There are some of the mopiest people I've ever met that work in kitchens, and also some of the most brilliant and interesting and fun people. And so creating an environment where people are, able to be themselves, to be passionate about food. We hire from all around the world. Last summer, we had 16 languages spoken throughout our operation, which I think is just so darn cool. And so, but even those conversations, so I'll say this now. So we work with veterans of the industry. We're hiring on traditional platforms, whatever, like people who have been around. We're hiring students as students. So they're doing an internship with us. A lot of times they turn into long-term employees eventually, or we're hiring people out of school. So we have the young contingent, the veteran contingent, and that's kind of on the full-time year-round side of our manpower. In season, one of the things that we've done that's been amazing here, did it at a couple properties prior, is H2B and J1. And so that's something, if a club has a certain size, I would suggest looking into that as an opportunity, because, and I do all those interviews myself, and it takes a long time. So talent selection, to your question, like, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen on the front end before you just pull the trigger on a hire. Congressional, we saw the HR director from Congressional do a presentation in Tampa at CMA. This woman was amazing. The process that they go through to choose just one person is crazy long. But it's that hire slow, fire fast, hire slow mentality that results in, by the time you hire that person, it's a good investment. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of my my approach to that. So the H2BJ1 component, J1s are there for 3 months in the summer. So they're the perfect.
Explain that to our listeners that might not know the acronym for that.
Okay, cool. So H2B are food service workers from other countries who tend to have experience in this already. Like, these are people that are doing this for their career. Maybe they've been in several different countries. Maybe they've been in America for a few different years doing this, and they can work 6 months at a property. And so in any given calendar year, they'll work in 2 different properties, and they can go different places every time. But what a lot of times happens and really benefits us is, if you're a place that treats people well, you provide a great work environment, and then you pay, on par with the industry or better, you're going to get those people back every time. And so we, on the kitchen side, we have returners every summer now, like people that we know and love. They know everything that we're doing already. So there's no more training involved in that. They just show up and kick some butt. The J1s, these are folks that are tend to be probably smarter than me. They're doing finance or psychology or some non-food service degree in their home country. And it's a travel and culture visa for them to be 3 months in America during the summer and then the winter. We only work with summer ones here, but where I was before, we had winter ones as well. Mm-hmm. And so this year we're working with Mongolia, Thailand, Turkey, and Montenegro. For those guys, we end up with just the most dynamic young people. And those interviews are maybe only 20 minutes long. And the first question is, have you ever been in a kitchen before? The answer sometimes is no. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but I'm trying to select people who, their mom had a restaurant, or they had a high school job as a server or a cook or something like that. So they understand the environment. The attitude that these guys generally have is way better than a lot of what we get locally. And so they can land in a very short time. They're not going to be like your broiler chef, right? But they're going to knock out tons of prep, or they can work a garde manger station in your all-day dining restaurant. We had 2 on a station last year. They were just like, they're better than most of the local hires we had. And they were psychology majors or whatever. So as long as you're taking the time to select, what you end up with is an incredible mix of people that get it done. And we have, knock on all the wood, we have not, even coming out of COVID, we didn't have a problem getting staff. I guess the last thing I should say is, if you're a chef, affiliate yourself with any culinary school you can in your community. Yes. And so in Idaho, I would travel to the CIA, Johnson & Wales. We had to fly across the country every time we wanted to recruit. In any, Chicago's big, some medium-sized cities, maybe you have 2 or 3 schools. Here we have 7, and I partner with 5. And then you just give. So you go there and you talk, hey, what do you guys want to know about? Oh, we're purchasing class could learn about how you receive and purchase at your club. Cool. Just go talk to them, do demos, become familiar to them. And then guess what? They all want to come work there, right? And so a great stream of staff can come out of all those different schools. Now, you're not going to get the aces. You still have to have your veterans to counterbalance that equation, right? So you can't, coming out of COVID, we had 17 students at one point, and that was very hard. Cutting our fingers off at every turn. But if you get that,
we're out of time, and I didn't get to talk about your beekeeping, your maple syrup production. You're hosting the 2026 President's Cup at Medinah, which is, Canada will be there with bells on. What else would you like to share in a final maybe minute here with our crew? Because we could have done 2 hours on this, obviously, but so we didn't even get to half the questions that I want to talk to you about. But so many great takeaways and nuggets, Matthew. I know people can reach out to you on LinkedIn. I know they can connect with you if they have some questions for you. But just really appreciate it. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, absolutely. That's on me. Too much talking. But I love all this stuff. So I just, I live for this. Should definitely mention the 100 years of Medinah, which is happening now. So this is our centennial year. We're going to do an amazing party this summer in July for all of the membership to celebrate 100 incredible years here at this club. And then the other thing really would be the President's Cup. Obviously, we're going to host that next year. After the completion of that, we will be, I believe, the only club in the world that's hosted all of the majors, inclusive of that one. So it's a great honor on the golf side. And then just being a part of that is awesome. My team will be handling what's called the 1924 Club Experience. And so that's kind of the VIP food and beverage experience that attendees have access to on the VIP level. Otherwise, I just would say, what an honor to be here with you, gents. What a great experience to speak with you. Much thanks to Miss Diana out there who's working hard, doing the good fight for our industry and bringing people in. And I'm just happy to be part of it too. So thank you very much.
Matthew, thanks for sharing with our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the great pleasures of doing this is talking to people like Matt and learning about their journey and their nuggets of best practices. So thank you for listening. Thank you for attending. We'll see you next month with the next Q&A call. And as always, we will see you, ladies and gentlemen, on the inside.